Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Ship and Read. Today I'll be doing my June wrap up. Before I get started, if you're new to this channel, please don't hesitate to subscribe down below as well as the notification bell. And if you're new, hi, hello, I'm Stephanie. I do a lot of bookish content, but honestly, let's just get started with all the June stuff because June was surprisingly a good reading month for me. For June, I somehow managed to read a total of 19 books, which means I read a total of 6,585 pages. Out of those 19 books, I read one book that was 2.5 stars, 5 books that were 3 stars, 4 books that were 3.5 stars, 5 books that were 4 stars, 1 book that was 4.5 stars, and then 3 books that were 5-star reads. So quality was fantastic as well as the quantity. So the first book I want to talk about is Not Here to Be Liked by Michelle Quash. I'm really hoping I pronounced her last name correctly. This book I gave 4 stars. This book follows a girl. Her name is Eliza, where she is basically a shoe-in for the editor-in-chief position at her school newspaper until ex-jock Len decides to run against her and he ends up winning. So she ends up writing an essay to vent out her frustration and she ends up accidentally starting a feminist movement. And now there is a growing tension between all her students and herself. Some of them think that she is just trying to call misogyny because she's a sore loser, and the other half believes that she's a gender equality champion. And amidst all these tension right now, her and Len have to do a lot of activities together to pretend that they are civil. And of course, as the book continues, her and Len sort of develop some sort of friendship and later on a relationship, as all YA books. And I actually really enjoyed this book. I love the feminist topics that were discussed in here and some of the challenges that she was facing amongst her peers as a female and as a person of color. I also like that the other main character, Len, is also a person of color too. He's half Japanese, and I liked a lot of diversity and representation in this book. But not only that, but the romance and the banter between the two characters were just really fun and entertaining, which is why I really enjoy the romance overall and why I also give this book 4 stars. Next book I pick up is These Witches Don't Burn by Isabella Sterling. I did talk about this a lot more in detail in one of my reading vlogs, which I'll link above and down below in case you want to check that out. I did a long weekend reading vlog and I did such an amazing job reading a ton of books, so definitely check out that video. And a lot of those books I will be talking about today were mentioned in that video as well. But for this book, I did give 3.5 stars. This book follows a teenager. Her name is Hannah, who is an elemental witch, meaning she has ability to control fire, air, water, earth. But of course, as a witch, she needs to keep her magic abilities a secret, and if she's caught using her power in front of a reg, aka a non-witch, she could potentially lose her powers. In the meantime, she's also dealing with her ex-girlfriend Veronica, who had a falling out and they broke up due to some sort of incident that happened in New York City. But now the issue is that right now there is evidence that there's a blood witch who is now in town, and blood magic and blood witches are basically shunned against her people because of what they do. And so her and Veronica now have to team together to figure out what is happening because none of the adults believe that there is a blood witch in town. And so as the book continues, she's trying to figure out what's happening. She also ends up meeting a new girl in town. Her name is Morgan, who is a cute ballerina. And so right now she's essentially juggling a new girl, her ex, as well as a potential murderous blood witch in town. I felt the premise of this book sounded really good, but the issue with this book was that I felt like the beginning was very convoluted. There was a lot of mentions about this incident in New York City between her and Veronica that was never really addressed until the very end. So the entire time you're just wondering what happened in this trip. Why is this blood witch in town? Because it also felt like everything about New York City, like it connected with the breakup as well as the blood witch. So for most of the book, you're just trying to figure out what is happening. And I felt like this book would have been a lot more enjoyable if the author actually went ahead and told us early on like what happened. Therefore, you're not just continuously like confused, which really took out my enjoyment for the book, aka why I gave this book only 3.5 stars. The next 2 books I finished were a series. The first one is Daughter of the Pirate King, and then I also finished the sequel and the finale, which is Daughter of a Siren Queen. This book I gave 3.5 stars, and this book I gave 4.5 stars. I did talk about these 2 books a lot more in detail in that reading vlog I mentioned earlier, and all I can say is that I actually really enjoyed the series. This book basically follows a girl. Her name is Alosa, where she is the daughter of a pirate king, and she was sent on a secret mission to be captured by a rival pirates to find something aboard the ship. And as the story kind of continues, she ends up getting toe-to-toe and head-to-head with the first mate. And of course, things kind of progress from there. I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed the adventures and the way how the direction that this book took. I especially enjoyed the second book. I thought that I really enjoyed all the characters. I love the storyline. I love the plot. I love the relationships that were formed in this book. I just loved a lot about this book, which is why I give this book a lot higher compared to this first one. I feel like the first half of this book was very slow and it took a long time for things to kind of get started. That being said though, both books were such an easy read and fast read as well, which is why I read these so quickly and why I actually did finish this book. I feel like if it wasn't because it was a fast read, I might have actually DNF'd this book because of how slow the first half was, but I'm glad I ended up finishing it because the second book was truly a wonderful book. And there is technically a third book in the series, but it's more of a spin-off because it follows different characters that were introduced in this series. So I am really curious to find out more about these characters. I definitely want to pick up the third book when that comes out later this year. The next book I picked up is Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book I gave 5 stars. I also talked about this a lot more in detail in that reading vlog I mentioned. This book was honestly such a good read. It follows a woman, her name is Carrie Soto, where in the beginning of the book you find her at a tennis match where someone else is about to win a Grand Slam and it's about to also break her own record of the highest number of Grand Slams ever. And she decides to get out of retirement and go back into training so she can reclaim and hold on to that title. So the book then goes into flashbacks of her at a young age, going into training as a teenager, as a child, under the tutelage of her father, who is also a renowned tennis player himself. And you see her journey and her career from just a little girl being a tennis player to then being the Carrie Soto who is worldwide famous, has the highest number of Grand Slams, etc. The reason why I ended up really enjoying this book is because I felt like the author did such a good job of characterization. I felt like even though I went into this book fully expecting to dislike Carrie Soto just because of the premise of this book, I was just kind of like, your time is over, let someone else win, you know what I mean? And not only that, but she's also a very unlikable character. She was known as the bitch. She was also known as the battle axe. She was known as a Cold War because of just how cold she was with her rivals and opponents, and she was really made out to be a truly unlikable character. And the fact that Taylor Jenkins Reid is able to make you become so invested with her as a character, like, is a testament to her writing abilities. I mean, I went into it fully expecting to dislike this book, and I ended up coming out fully enamored with Carrie Soto, fully invested for her journey. I was low-key rooting for her despite everything because you just learn so much about her character and her growth as a person as well. And truly, this was such an amazing read. I feel like I was just so invested in the story overall, so I highly recommend this one. Then the next book I picked up is The Witch and the Tsar, which I also gave 5 stars. This book is by Alyssa Salenokova Gilmore. I'm really hoping I pronounced the name correctly. This book was also another one that I mentioned in that reading vlog, and this book was such a surprise and such a delight for me to read. It basically follows the origin, or not really the origin story, but kind of an origin story of Baba Yaga, where she's not really an old wizened woman as we all kind of know from the stories, but she's actually a very young, youthful, beautiful, stunning woman where she's just trying to live by herself in the woods and do her own thing. Then she ends up getting a guest at her door who is the Tsarina, aka Anastasia, and due to their history she ends up deciding to help her out because she's actually being poisoned and there's something going on and her life is in danger. She ends up going back to Moscow to help Anastasia and making sure to protect her and heal her from whoever keeps poisoning her. And as the story progresses, you learn a lot more about Russia, you learn a lot more about the politics that's involved with the Tsar as well, aka Ivan the Terrible. This book was very reminiscent to me of The Bear and the Nightingale, Spitting Silver, as well as Circe in a way. Like, Circe is about this woman who you just see the years pass by her and you just see all these different stories and her interactions with these great legends. And that's kind of how I feel with this book as well. You see Russia moving along and you see her, Baba Yaga, just interacting when she can, helping Russia when she can, and that's kind of how I would describe this book the best way. It's kind of a mixture of those 3 books. If you like those books, I highly recommend this book. The writing was incredibly lush and detailed. It was rich, it was stunning. I love the characters, I love the romance that was involved. In the beginning I was kind of iffy about the romance, but then as interactions grew and as time progressed, I slowly found myself rooting for the 2 of them, and overall I just really enjoyed this book. The next book I picked up is After Love by Tanya Bryn. O'Brien. Really hoping I pronounced the last name correctly. Again, this is another book that I picked up for the reading vlog, but for this book I only gave it 3 stars. I felt like the beginning was really strong, but then I kind of lost interest second half of the book, which is very ironic because it's usually the other way around. But this book basically follows a girl, her name is Ash, where she gets into an accident and now she is actually a Grim Reaper, but she can't forget her first love, Poppy, and she'll do anything she can to see her again and see if things can work out despite the fact that she is dead. The beginning was very fascinating. Like I said already, I was very invested with her and Poppy. It kind of starts off with their relationship, and it also went into the whole accident and how she becomes a Grim Reaper, and that part I was super invested in. But then halfway through I felt like it started to get messy overall, and then I just lost interest. But I still continued on with the book because I was hoping that things would kind of pick up, but that did not happen, which is why I felt like this book only deserved a 3 stars. Next book I picked up is The Last Namsara by Kristen Cicerelli. This is a book that I have been trying to read for the longest time. I ended up giving this book 3 stars, and I am doing a dedicated reading vlog on this whole series, which should be up shortly, I believe. I'm actually on the 3rd book right now, but this book was just okay. Spoiler alert, the second book was significantly better. I was much more invested with the second book, but this first one was just okay of a read. It follows Asha, where she is considered the last Namsara, and it's not a good thing. At this point in time, her people basically hunt down these dragons because of the history that happened between the dragons and themselves, and she is the Namsara. She goes and hunts down these dragons for her father, the king. The point is though, I just felt like this book was just an okay read. I felt very disconnected with the characters. The story itself was interesting. I was curious about the dragons. I wanted to know more about it, but I did feel like the dragons definitely took a backseat, even though this book was very much heavily focused on dragons. But because of the whole dragon hunting element to it, they were never really present until the very end of the book. So I went into fully expecting a ton of dragons involved. That was not the case. Asha herself as a character wasn't okay. She definitely had a lot of hardships growing up and a lot of really hard decisions to make. So I respected her as a character, but that was kind of it. So I do think, like I said already, the second book was so good. So I feel like the series is still worth checking out, even though the first book was just okay. Then this next book I picked up is Lessons in Chemistry, which I gave 5 stars. I really enjoyed this book. It basically follows a woman who is a scientist. This is definitely a historical book where it's set sometime in the 1900s, and she is struggling to be a female scientist in a very male-dominated industry. And every time she tries to do anything, she is always looked down upon. It's a lot harder for her to get any sort of leverage or recognition for her work unless a male backs her up. So she's trying to navigate this whole male-dominated society while also being the renowned scientist that she is. And then years later, she somehow ends up on a cooking show, even though she is a chemist at heart. And the book kind of goes into a story about how she gets to that role and the aftermath of it. I had such a good time reading this book. It was fun, it was entertaining. I love the main character. I loved her relationship with her daughter. I loved her story as to how she got there. Just her personality was just so quirky, but also like on point, you know, like she knew what she wanted, and the way how she said things to get what she wanted, despite her being a female and it was just already harder for her, was just, it was just a lot of fun, guys. That's all I can say for this book. I really enjoyed it overall. I can see why so many people raved about this book, because it was just really entertaining, and I highly recommend this book overall. Next book I picked up is What I Want You to See by Catherine Linka. This book I gave 3.5 stars. This book follows a girl, her name is Sabine Reyes, where she's had a ton of hardships after losing her mom and losing her home, but then she ends up winning a scholarship to California's most prestigious art school, and she's able to learn under the tutelage of Colin, who is a renowned faculty member who she's hoping to mentor her and tutor her and guide her so she can make it in the art world. Unfortunately though, he ends up bashing her publicly, kind of humiliating her art pieces, so she's lost all hope. Until one day she ends up meeting a guy, his name is Adam, who is a grad student, and he helps her get some insight into Colin's work by sharing with her his unreleased art piece due to the fact that he has a set of keys into his locked art studio somehow. And Colin did tell her in class that she should learn to transcribe or copy down a piece that she connects with as a way for her to grow and nurture her art ability. And she decides to copy his art piece, the one that is unrevealed and unfinished. But then something happens and she somehow ends up, unbeknownst to her, a party in a crime, and it is so well plotted that no one even knows about this crime except for her. So this book I thought had a great premise. I was very fascinated with the characters, the story overall, but I do feel like it was lacking in terms of some of the character relationships and the dynamics between it. I never really understood Sabine's like character and her motive sometimes, because I feel like it's obvious in hindsight who this Adam is, and the whole like sketchiness of it all, the fact that he had keys to this place, and the fact that she just just had so much trust in this random ass guy that she found. I was kind of like, this seems a little far-fetched to me, but somehow like she really believed in him, and now she is in this path that she was not expecting. I was curious to see how it all ended, how everything would come together, but that was kind of it for this book. I felt like the reason why I still gave it 3.5 stars is because the plot was fascinating and I was super curious, but in terms of like the characterizations, I was kind of like about that part. Next book I picked up is Comfort Me with Apples by Catherine M. Valenti. So I gave 3.5 stars. This is a very short of a novel. This book follows a woman, her name is Sophia, where she feels like her husband is perfect and she's essentially made for her husband. Like, she is perfect for her husband and everything is perfect. Like, her life is perfect, work is perfect, everything is perfect except the fact that he's always gone. He works so much, but then she starts to wonder about these things, you know, some dark things that's hiding beneath the surface, and just the look on her husband's face when he first returns from any business trips or from work. There's just something lingering behind there and she's not really sure what it is, but everything is perfect, right? And that's kind of how I describe this book. It was eerie. I love the atmosphere. I felt like she did a really good job with that, but the reason why I felt like this book was not deserving more of that was because just when I became like super invested in the story, it ended. This is why I don't really do short stories for the most part. That being said though, the way how the author built up the suspense, the way how the author set the tone for this book was done really well, which is why I still give this book 3.5 stars. Then this next book I picked up is A Bridge of Souls by Victoria Schwab. I believe this is a 3rd book in the series, and I give this book 4 stars. Again, I really enjoyed her books overall. I love the characters. This book follows Cass, who is able to see ghosts, and she has a best friend who is also a ghost. Her parents are also ghost hunters, so in the beginning of the series she ends up following her parents around as they do a new show. They're exploring all these famous cities for their ghost tours and their ghost stories, and so she ends up meeting a lot of ghosts along the way. She has her own adventures, and this book was set in New Orleans. I really enjoyed New Orleans, which is why it's kind of reminiscent, because I really enjoyed my time when I visited that city. I really want to go back again someday soon because it was just a lot of fun and the food is amazing. So yeah, I'm not going to say too much about this book because is the 3rd book in the series and I don't want to spoil anything, but I really enjoyed the characters. I really like the direction of the story overall in terms of the plots as well as the relationships. So I don't know if there's going to be another book in this series. I feel like there is based on the ending, but at the same time I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is in fact another book to the series. The next book I picked up is Librarian of Burned Books by Brianna Labuskis. I'm really hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. This book I gave 4 stars. I read this for my book club and I really enjoyed this book. I did not expect to enjoy it much as I did. I feel like historical fiction to me have been not the greatest, but I did read a really good one this year so far, which is The Huntress, and I'm happy to say that this is another one that was a surprisingly really good book as well. It follows 3 different characters along 3 different timelines. One is Althea, who is in Berlin in 1933. Another one is Hannah, who is in Paris in 1936. And the last one is Vivian, who is in New York in 1944. And the book, like I said, just follows along the 3 of them. And I love each of their perspectives. I loved the way how the story connected at the end and kind of like see how they connect. I was so here for it. I love the way how the story ended. I love learning and reading about each of their perspective during that time because a lot was going on with World War II and the Nazis and of course the burning of books that happened in Germany. I was here for all of that. The only reason why I only give this book 4 stars and not like 5 stars or anything like that is because I did feel like the timeline was a little bit confusing because 1933 and 1936 is so close to each other that sometimes it felt like confusing as they jumped back and forth between the two, because also some of the characters they knew each other And so I don't really want to spoil too much because I feel like I don't want to spoil anything. But point is though, there is a lot of duplicates, or not duplicates, but like mentions of other characters during different time periods because they're so close to each other. So it can be a little confusing, and I feel like it was definitely what a lot of my book club members felt about that, because they felt it was very confusing as well. But yeah, I really enjoyed the story overall. Next book I picked up is Legends and Lattes, which I gave 3 stars. This is supposed to be a cozy fantasy, and it follows this woman. I want to say she's a goblin or something like that, or dwarf. I think she's a dwarf, and she ends up finding about this new invention called coffee when she went on like some sort of journey or travel or whatever. And she comes back and she decides to open her own coffee shop in a town where no one knew about coffee. And so the story kind of just follows her trying to set up this store, to this coffee shop, introducing what coffee is to the residents of the city and all of that. Definitely cozy. I can see the vibe there, but I don't think this is a book really for me. I felt like it felt very slow at times, and I felt like there was one part that where the trajectory of the plot kind of shifted a lot. And if you have read this book, you know what I'm talking about, because I did listen to an audiobook, which I don't know if it really like was detrimental to my experience, because I feel like it wasn't, because I actually did follow along the book pretty well, because it wasn't high fantasy or anything like that where you have to learn like all these magic, you have to learn the world. It's very much just like replacing people with dwarves, and then in a city where no one knew about coffee. Like that, I felt like that was only like the fantasy part to it. But then like around like around 3/4 into the book, the tone shifted dramatically, and the way how the plot shifted also shifted dramatically. And so for me, that was when I started to get a little confused, which is why I only give this book like 3 stars, because I felt like if it had just stayed that coziness, I would have like liked it a lot more. But I didn't like that complete shift in tone, which is why I only gave this book 3 stars. Next book I picked up is the Hookup Plan, which I gave 4 stars. So this is the 3rd book in the series, but I did not read the first 2 books at all, and it did not deter me in any way. I didn't feel confused or lost in the story at all. So I definitely feel like this is a series where you don't need to read it consecutively to understand the story overall. But this book follows a woman, her name is London, who is a very successful pediatric surgeon who just needs to find some time to just balance out her life and de-stress. And so her 2 good friends, which I'm assuming are the 2 characters in the first 2 books, are telling her that just get a guy, have some sex, you'll de-stress, it'll be fine, you know. And she ends up finding her old high school nemesis. His name is Drew, and for some reason he's back in town. They end up meeting at their high school reunion, and unbeknownst to her, he's actually back in town because of the hospital that she works at. He's there to do some sort of like auditing, and initially she thinks it's a terrible idea, but she's like, you know what, I've always found him attractive, let's have this de-stress moment, and they end up hooking up. And of course, as the book progresses, their relationship obviously changes and it blossoms, and a lot of politics as well with the whole hospital and his company doing the auditing, and a lot of like just internal politics too with some of the colleagues that she's working with. I really enjoyed this book overall. It was such a fun and fast read. Definitely what I'm looking for in terms of a romance read. The reason why I didn't give it 4 stars is because I felt like it was missing that oomph, you know, like there's just certain romance books where it has that extra spice to it that it can really be a 5-star read, and this book didn't have that for me. This book was still a really solid romance book, so if you're looking for something like that, definitely check out this one. The next book I picked up is The Shadows by Alex North. This book I gave 3 stars. This is a thriller where it follows this guy. His name is Paul. And 25 years ago, there was a boy in town. His name was Charlie Captree, where he was the weird one, you know, like the eerie one, the kind of creepy one that no one really liked too much. And people always suspected that he would do something absolutely sinister at some point in his life. And that did happen 25 years ago, where he committed a murder that was so terrible that it was the darkest point in the town's history. And now in present day, Paul is trying to put his life together with his mom, his work, etc. But now his mom has taken a turn for the worse and is suffering from dementia. And before long, he finds out that there is a copycat in the town nearby and that the local detective is investigating it. And his mother, for some reason, is very distressed by it all. This book, I felt like, sounded really promising. I enjoyed his other books in the past, which is The Whisper Man. I believe I gave that book like 4.5 stars. That book was great. This book was less so. I felt very disconnected with the story. The plot was just an okay read. Where everything came together, that was when I found it fascinating, which is why I still give this book 3 stars. But the build-up wasn't really there. It was quite slow at times as well. And to be quite honest, I even considered DNFing this book because of how slow this book was taking to get to that point. But because I was listening to an audio, it just went through really fast. And next thing I know, I was at that climax area and everything was being revealed, and I found that very fascinating. But it took me some time to get to that point, which is why I felt like this book was just an okay read compared to his first book. The next book I picked up is Barbarians Touch, which is the next book in the Ice Pen and Barbarian series. Again, I gave that book 4 stars. I feel like, to be honest, I will say this every single time, their books are just fun. It's entertaining. There's really not much substance to it, but it's a great filler when you're just listening to something quick and simple, and this is perfect for that. So if you're looking for a great smut read, definitely check out the series overall. I just got a notification that the next book is available for me on Libby, so I will be listening to that after I finish my current audiobook, but I'm pretty excited to dive into the next book in the series. Then this next book I picked up is Love Times Infinity by Lane Clark. This book I gave 3 stars. To be quite honest, I did read this book in the very beginning of the month, so I don't remember everything about this book, but it does follow a high school junior. Her name is Michi, where she's just trying to define who she is for her scholarship essay. Her goal is to make it to Brown as a first-generation college student. And because of her history with her mother, who is estranged, she feels like the concept of family, which is one of the prompts for her essay, is hard to define. There's also a new kid in town. His name is Derek, and for some reason he has his eyes on Michi, very much so, even though she feels like she is no one and is basically invisible. Then one day Michi's mother decides to reach out unexpectedly to see if they can make amends, and now Michi needs to decide if she wants to rehash these old wounds or finally close the door on her past, while also juggling this potential relationship with Derek. This book was just okay to me. I felt like I picked this up because it was supposed to be very reminiscent of Nicola Yoon, and I definitely felt that way, but not to the same extent. I felt like Nicola Yoon's writing is just a lot more superior, and I was a lot more invested with her characters, but this one I just felt very disconnected overall. This last book I finished is For Her Consideration, which I gave 2.5 stars. This book basically follows a woman, her name is Nina, where 3 years ago she had a crushing breakup, and she used to do a lot of script writing for TV and shows, etc. But now for some reason she's stuck in the suburbs in her aunt's condo, writing and drafting emails for celebrities, essentially just managing their email accounts. But then one day she gets a surprise meeting from Ari Fox, who is an up-and-coming celebrity, and things kind of happen between the two of them. This is definitely a book where I definitely just listened to it thinking it'll get better and it'll get better, and it never really did. I feel like this book had a lot of potential. I was curious to know more about, you know, what happened with her breakup, why she decided to ostracize herself for 3 years without any friends. She lives in the suburbs, like it's kind of far to get into town. I was curious about a lot of it, but the execution and some of the character development and the relationship was just fell a little bit flat for me. So this is definitely a book where I should have DNF'd earlier on, but I just kept continuing hoping that it would get better, and it never really did. Anyways, those are all the books that I read for the month of June. For the most part, I read some really amazing books, and then I also read 1 or 2 not so amazing books, but I do think that overall, I had a really great time reading in June. Unlike my time in May and April, I feel like they're just not the greatest month, because I did also manage to read 3 of some of my favorite books of the entire year, which is friggin' fantastic. So anyways, let me know down below which books did you read for the month of June. Have you read any of these books before? What was your favorite read that you read this past month? And let me know down below so I can check it out as well if I haven't picked it up already. But as always, if you like this video, please do give me a thumbs up. It really does help out my channel. And if you'd like to see more content of me, please don't hesitate to subscribe down below, as well as the notification bell. And as always, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!